let's turn the calendar to 2025 and talk about the next game that is in line here, and that is the Peach Bowl in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, one that is very familiar to Irish fans. It is number 5, Texas, against number 4, Arizona State. That game, again, takes place on January 1st at 1 o'clock on ESPN. Texas, this is the biggest line of this round. Texas is favored by 13.5 points. Texas won the only previous meeting, which was the 2007 Holiday Bowl, and they won pretty big, 52-34.
What?
So
a Holiday Bowl was high scoring? No way.
I know. Hey,
no way.
Shock and awe. Shock and awe. All right. Brian, I'm going to have you kick this one off. Talk about the Sun Devils of Arizona State, kind of how they got here, and make sure you throw in as much Scattaboo as you possibly can.
Yes, well, the Fighting Scataboos got here, Vince. This is one of the better stories of the season. I mean, it really is. This is a team that literally, according to the Big 12 media, was picked to finish dead last in the Big 12. And at 141 points, they were 16 points behind Houston, who was 15, and then 55 points behind Cincinnati. Now, with all due respect, the Big 12 media had a rough year, and it's not necessarily their fault. They had Utah, K-State, and Oklahoma State, Kansas, and Arizona as their top 5. Their bottom 5 included Baylor, who I think won 7-8 games. BYU is pretty good. Cincinnati, Houston, and, of course, Arizona State, who won the league. But honestly, guys, they didn't necessarily – they got it wrong, but it was understandable. We all got it wrong. I thought Arizona State was going to stink this year. This is a football team that's coming off of a 3-9 season, where they had losses by 12, 29 to Fresno, 14, 3 to Cal, 3 at home to Colorado, who was terrible. They lost by 8 to Washington. Go figure that one. Lost by 52 to Utah, lost by 36 to Oregon, and lost by 36 to Arizona at the end of the season. And, yeah, they got a transfer quarterback from Michigan State, and Sam Leavitt, who's a talented young player. They got Jordan Tyson through the portal, obviously Cam Scattaboo. But, guys, this was a team that just is not supposed to be a very good football team. I mean, that's Cam Scattaboo last year as well. And Kenny Dillingham did a masterful job with his football team. He really did. And you kind of saw a little bit of it early where you thought, you know what, they're not going to be half bad. You go out and you beat Mississippi State at home. Yeah, Mississippi State's not very good, but it's an SEC team that had beaten Arizona a couple previous years before. They play what I think is a decent Texas State team led by G.J. Kenny. Go on the road, beat them. Actually watched that game. It was a very entertaining game. They won late. Lost to Texas Tech. You're like, you know what? But, hey, you're 3-1. And then you start to kind of get some wins over some bigger name teams. They beat Kansas at home. They beat Utah at home. And then they go have that loss to Cincinnati. And you're thinking, 5-2, they're going to make a bowl game. This is a heck of a coaching job by Kenny Dillingham. They haven't lost since. That was October 19th. They haven't lost since. They blew out Oklahoma State. They had a bye week after the Cincinnati loss, which was a bad loss, by the way. Blew out Oklahoma State. Beat UCF without Cam Scattaboo, by the way. Then go on the road to beat K-State, who I think is a good football team, by 10. Beat BYU by 5 in a game that wasn't as close as the final score showed. BYU scored late to make it that close. And then blew out Arizona State on the road. And then go into the Big 12 title game, fellas, and beat Iowa State 45-19 in a game that was not nearly as close as the final score showed. They could have scored over 60 in that game if they wanted to. That was an absolutely brilliant performance. And I got to give Kenny Dillingham a lot of credit. Those kids play loose all season long. They played with no pressure. And then as what I loved about it, guys, is we've seen teams do this before where they play with no pressure because there is none. And then all of a sudden late in the year, like, wow, we're better than we thought. We have a shot at this. And they kind of fold in some games. We saw K-State do that. We saw Iowa State do that a little bit, where Iowa State played really tight in that game. And Arizona State came out and said, no one expected us to be here anyway, so we're just going to go out there and have some fun, and lit Iowa State up and earned us a right to be here, fellas. I mean, it was a great season. I understand Curt Cignetti is considered the favorite to win the Coach of the Year and all that, and it's deserved. But if you're not going to give it to Curt Cignetti, it's got to go to Kenny Dillingham. The job he did with this football team, and a lot of it was, I mean, you got some portal guys, but there's a lot of guys that were already on the team that just bought into what he's selling and turned this thing around. He did a brilliant job with this football team, and it's a more talented team than you'd think. The big problem is late in the season, they lost their stud receiver, Jordan Tyson, to an injury. He will not play in this game. But they were able to go out and win some other games without him, but those teams weren't Texas. But just a great run to get here, fellas. They 11-2 season after going 3-9 last year. And a lot of blowouts. Phenomenal coaching job. There have been several great coaching jobs this season. Deion Sanders did one at Colorado to lead them to a 9-3 record. We've talked a lot about, a lot of these coaches have done a great job, but Kenny Dillingham's job that he did this year at Arizona State's as good as the job anybody's done.
Like, this is the same team that was holding open kicker tryouts, like, early on in the season. I mean, just to throw the special teams angle in there, like
necessary roughness angle, right? Like, right. I mean, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, does Kathy Ireland come to try out for the team or something like, you know what I mean? Like
successful teams don't have open tryouts in the middle of the season, like generally. That's just not, those two things don't usually go hand in hand. And when you're putting out an announcement to the student body that there's open kicking tryouts, like, usually things aren't going in the right direction. And now they're in the college football playoff, which is just mind-blowing. Like, the whole story of Arizona State is just absolutely mind-blowing. So completely agree with everything that you're saying there, Brian. So that leaves Texas for Trevor. Trevor, give us the rundown on Texas's season and how they got to the Peach Bowl.
Texas has had an interesting season. They finished in second place in the SEC. They lost to Georgia in a rematch from the regular season. They lost 22-19 in overtime when Georgia had Gunnar Stockton and Carson Beck was knocked out on the final play of the first half on a Hail Mary attempt. They went 7-1 in conference during the regular season. Their only loss was to Georgia in the regular season at home, 30-15. Here's why I say that Texas's schedule is weird. Because we're all under the consensus here that, like, ranked wins are considered like who finishes the season ranked, right? Like, and so for Texas, it's weird, right? Technically, they have one ranked win on the season, and it's beating Clemson in the first round of the playoffs. But they also beat Michigan, who was ranked when they played them. Vanderbilt was ranked when they played them. Oklahoma was ranked when they played them, and Texas A&M was ranked when they played them. However, they're not ranked anymore. We know how Michigan's season turned out. We know how Vandy finished. We know how Oklahoma finished, right? Go midshipman. But it's interesting to see that Texas was decimating some of these teams. They went into the big house and handled Michigan. You know what I mean? And everybody's like, yo, this team is pretty legit. But I would make the argument that Texas is one of those teams in the playoffs that we still don't know quite yet what this team is about. You know what I mean? Because we don't have that.
Do you mean like we don't know quite how good they are?
Yes.
Fair.
Yeah,
Fair.
because we've seen them play well, but it's been against like inferior opponents that you kind of have to make an argument for. They beat Florida, they beat Arkansas at Arkansas, and Kentucky all by double digits. And those three teams gave other teams in the SEC a lot of problems. You know what I mean? But you don't really know how good Texas is because once they've gotten on that big stage, they lost to the best team that they played this season twice. Once was a very not convincing, or a very convincing loss to Georgia in the regular season. And the second time was in the SEC championship game when you let the backup come in and lead a basically game-winning drive in overtime, and the rushing offense for Georgia took over. So Texas is one of the few teams in the playoffs that people kind of have some question marks about, like how good is Texas? And a lot of those questions are going to be answered against Arizona State because this is a very quality opponent. Despite whatever narratives people want to draw up, Texas has had issues at times this season stopping the run. And what does Arizona State do really, really well? They run the football well. So this is going to be a much more interesting matchup than I think what the spread indicates. But, it's going to be interesting. Will they be able to establish the line of scrimmage? For Texas, you go back and look, and in the games that they performed the best, they were able to run the ball well. They had convincing wins over Kentucky, and they beat Texas A&M that in a game that was closer than 17-7, and they beat Clemson 38-24 in a game that was not really ever that close. The commonality in those three, they all rushed the ball for over 200 yards. When Texas is able to put Quinn Ewers in a spot where he doesn't have to go be Superman, they do really well. And what happened those two games against Georgia? They combined for 60 rushing yards. So line of scrimmage is going to be a big topic of discussion, but this is how Texas got here. They're a team with a lot of question marks, but they're also a team with a lot of talent, a lot of size, a lot of skill, and they're now starting to become healthy at the right time. So it's going to be a fun matchup when they take on Arizona State.
So another potential, I mean, at least it's 2 Power 5 teams, but another potential, blue blood versus a newbie. Big spread in this one, obviously 13.5. It's big, even a bigger spread than Penn State and Boise State. So, boys, how do you see this one going? What are the matchups that stand out to you? What should we be looking for when we flip on the old TV at 1:00 on New Year's Day?
Well, let me ask you, Trev, let me ask you this question. How much, and it may not be at all, how much does this matchup change if Jordan Tyson's playing in his football game for you?
For me, not a lot, because I'm coming at it from the physicality standpoint.
Mhm.
Jordan Tyson absolutely adds a different dynamic to Arizona State's passing offense, but I think Texas has one of the best passing defenses in the country. I think it would have made a factor, but to me, this game comes down to who's the more – can Arizona State hang out?
And that's why I do think Jordan Tyson would have mattered because of exactly what you said. And that's what makes me feel like maybe they're not going to be able to stay in this game for 4 quarters.
Sure.
Because I think Arizona State's going to come out and be very physical on Texas. And if they come out early in the game and run the ball on them, sort of like what Indiana did to Ohio State on that opener, but eventually you're going to have to do something other than just run it for 4. It's like what we talked about in the last game, right? Like you're not going to be able to run Cam Scatterbo for 4 quarters. Now, Arizona State still has better weapons around Cam Scatterbo than Ashton Genty has around him, even without Jordan Tyson, and a better quarterback in Sam Levitt than what he has with Maddox Madsen. But I feel like against this Texas secondary, you need something to kind of take the pressure off. And that's the big thing for me, guys, is who steps up at receiver with Jordan Tyson out. If nobody does, then it's going to be hard for me to see Arizona State scoring enough to win, because I could see Arizona State moving the ball, but then getting field goals instead of touchdowns, because as the field gets closer, they can put more and more resources into the box to stop Cam Scatterbo. The other thing, too, is what we've seen from Arizona State is in some of those games where they really start getting rolling, a lot of times they'll be able to hit some big passing plays. We saw that against Arizona State, where they hit some big throws early. They're going to have to be able to hit those in these games, guys, early. Similarly, against this great pass defense, that's what Clemson did. What Clemson did early in that game is they came out and they hit some – Kate Klubnik threw some dimes in that football game, and his receivers and his tight end played great football. They're going to need to be able to make some of those plays to take some of the pressure off of Cam Scatterbo, because the one thing that can overcome physicality at this level is numbers, right? Like numbers in the box. And if they can do something to get Texas to play them more straight up, I do think they can run the football on them. There's no doubt. And then on the other side, Trev, is can Texas protect Quinn Ewers? He has not looked right for a while, guys. He really hasn't. He has not looked right for a while. And he just doesn't. The issue is, Trev, Arizona State has 21 sacks on the season. They're not a team that puts a lot of pressure on the quarterback. And I think ultimately that's my biggest concern in this game is I don't know that Arizona State on defense has enough to slow down Texas. Because what we've seen from Texas, to your point, Trev, you nailed it. Why did they look so bad against Georgia and even Arkansas, but didn't look bad in other games? Because those are the only teams that are able to whoop them in the trenches with their defense. And Georgia's a bad matchup for Texas. Clemson, it turned into a track meet and had no chance. Michigan, it turned into a track meet, no chance. Florida, track meet, no chance. If you get into a track meet with Texas, you're toast. If you make it a who's bigger, who's more physical, who's stronger, which is exactly what Trev said, that's where you have a chance to beat Texas. And I think Arizona State can do that early, guys. The question is, can they do enough on the perimeter on offense to stay with Texas early to allow them to wear Texas down late? That's my concern. And is their defense, do they have enough athleticism on the back end to come into this game against Texas and stop the receivers, Matthew Golden, Ryan Wingo, the Gunnar Helmet tight end, to the outside zone stretch stuff, perimeter stuff, the misdirection they do? Do they have enough weapons to stop that? Clemson didn't on defense. So even though Clemson's offense played pretty well early, their defense just couldn't stop Texas. Arizona State's going to have to get some early stops, and I think Texas has got too many weapons against a team that, if we're being honest, guys, has not exactly been a light the world on fire defense this season. Boise State's got a much better defense, in my opinion, than Arizona State does. And I know they've played better late, but I just don't know if it's enough against a team that's got these kind of weapons.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. I think Texas's arsenal of skilled players is just going to be too much for them. When they're humming, Jadon Blue and Quintravion Wisner are a tough duo to stop. Clemson found that out the hard way. Kentucky found that out the hard way. Texas A&M did. I mean, to put some numbers behind it, against Clemson, Jadon Blue went for $146 and 2 touchdowns. Wisner went for 110 and 2 touchdowns. Against Kentucky, Quintravion Wisner went for $158 and a touchdown, and Jadon Blue went for 96. And then against the Aggies, Wisner went for 186 and averaged 5.6 yards per carry. So it's going to be tough. And now their offensive line is back being healthy. But on defense, if Arizona State on offense can be physical enough to hang in and give themselves an opportunity at the end, I like them because they're a scrappy team, right? Like, these are the teams that you kind of have to be aware for in the play. A team that has nothing to lose. I mean, legitimately nothing to lose. I mean, they were voted the team predicted to finish last in their conference. Nobody expected them to be in their conference championship in the first place, let alone win. And now here they are receiving a first-round bye in the first.
And they needed a lot of help in November, Trev, to even get into the Big 12 title game. You know what I mean? Like, they needed a lot of other people. And as those teams kept falling, and they just kept winning.
Yeah.
And to your point, man, it's like the Indiana Notre Dame game last week. All the pressure's on Notre Dame. There's no pressure on Indiana. Same thing this week. All the pressure's on Texas. There's none on Arizona State. Can Arizona State handle the moment better than Indiana did? Now, what Arizona State has going for them is they don't have to play this game in Texas's home stadium, right? I mean, that's a little different environment. But that's the question, is can they handle the moment? They've handled it so far, guys, but the Big 12 championship game is a whole lot different than playing in a college football playoff game against Texas. And playing against Iowa State, and Matt Campbell did another coach who did a phenomenal coaching job this season is Matt Campbell. But that's a different animal than but to our point though, what the concern we had about that game, guys, is because we thought, I think I said I had Arizona State winning, but I said if the pass defense can't slow down Iowa State's quarterback and their 2,000-yard receivers, then I can see Iowa State running away with it. Well, they made Rocco Beck look bad in that game. I mean, they shut that pass game down. So as much as I dislike their pass defense on the whole of the season, the last time they played against a team that had 3,000-yard or 2,000-yard receivers and a 1,000-yard running back, a 3,000-yard quarterback, they shut that pass game down. Mm-hmm. And were able to confuse him with a lot of different coverage structures and rolling coverages, showing this, disguising this. And Rocco Beck looked uncomfortable the entire game. Can they do that to Quinn Ewers, who hasn't shown himself to be the most, I hate to say not mentally tough, but just just not confident, right? Yeah. Just not super confident, not super poised. Trev, you and I were talking about this the other day. I think it was you. I texted. I said, "Have you seen?" It might have been somebody else, but I said, "Have you seen Georgia run corner fires against anybody other than Texas?" And it hasn't been many, but they've brought multiple corner fires against Texas. Why? Quinn Ewers doesn't see it. He does not see that high and wide pressure off the backside. Can Arizona State find a way to get one of those pressures home and force an early turnover? I think ultimately that's something that they need if they're going to win this football game. If Texas protects the football and Quinn Ewers just plays a solid football game, Texas will win. The only question will be by how much. But if they can force turnovers and beat them up front, that's where Arizona State has a chance to pull this one off.
Yeah, I mean, you can tell that Quinn Ewers has not been playing as confidently in the pocket in comparison to what he did against like Michigan or what he did against Oklahoma. Right. And I think some of that is the injuries up front. You combine that with him playing on a bad ankle, his confidence is not where it was in comparison to earlier in the season. So if Arizona State is able to generate any sort of pressure on him, I think that's going to make this game that much more interesting.
All right, boys, it's prediction time. So let's jump right into this thing. We'll go the same order that we did last time. Brian, your prediction for this game.
I have Texas 31, Arizona State 20. I do think it's a game that if Texas comes out fast, this game could be over quick. Because I don't know that Arizona State can throw the ball the way that Clemson did against Texas. I think that game for Texas's pass defense was a lot like the USC game was for Notre Dame's pass defense. The other team's quarterback just played out of his mind. The receivers made some big-time plays, and they just didn't play great football. And I think that's going to be a big difference here. I think that's going to allow Texas to get their safeties more involved. I think Andrew Makuba is going to have a ton of tackles. Now, he's going to have a headache after the game trying to hit Cam Scadaboo 15 times, in this game. But I just think Texas has too much speed. They have too much depth. This is a good Texas defense. I do think that if Arizona State can, like you guys talked about, Trev, I think you said this, or maybe it was Vince in the earlier one, if you can weather that early storm, you can stay in this football game. I think that's what they got to do to not get blown out. I think the only way Arizona State can win this game, in my opinion, is just multiple turnovers from Texas. That's the way I see it. So I'm going 31-20 in a game that really we're going to look back and say, yes, it was 11 points, but Texas was clearly the better team. And I could see this being the one game that gets really ugly. I don't think Boise State's going to get completely rolled by Penn State the way that maybe some people think that it is. I could see Arizona State getting rolled by Texas unless they can force a lot of turnovers. And like Trevor said at the very beginning, if they can control the line of scrimmage, that's the chance they have. Because I think controlling the line of scrimmage, Trev, is going to result in the turnovers that we talk about. That's going to be the key. I just don't think they can do it for 4 quarters, guys, especially with the speed advantage that I think Texas has on the perimeter. So I'm 31-20 Longhorns.
Trev.
I have.
Oh, don't do that. Don't do that, Brian. Don't.
Ooh. I have
there. Okay.
I have Texas winning 34-24. And I do think it's going to be close early. I think Steve Sarkisian is going to be a little bit too much in his own head about, all right, like we did what we needed to against Clemson. We ran the ball well. We're going to rely on our athletes on the perimeter, right? They're going to rely on the Isaiah Bonds of the world. They're going to get Jadon Blue involved in the passing game. And so I think early on, it's going to look a little bit sloppy from Texas. There's going to be a lot, hey, we got some offensive linemen back. We're going to be able to protect Quinn Ewers again. This is going to be a chance to maybe get him into a rhythm before they have to move on and play either Ohio State or Oregon. I think Arizona State's going to be able to capitalize on that a little bit and move the line of scrimmage in their favor on offense. But I think I fall in line with Brian. I think Texas has too many horses and they're a little bit too deep. I do. Because their skill set that they have with their running backs, with the size, the defense that they have is not like anything that Arizona State has seen this season. I think it's going to be a good fight and one that we'll look back on. I think it's going to be a tale of two halves. I do. I think Arizona State is going to look really competitive. I think it could be like a little back and forth first half a little bit. Arizona State scores, Texas scores, Arizona State gets a field goal, Texas scores, something like that. Then I think in the second half, Texas kind of puts a lot of that to rest. They go back to what runs their offense the most efficiently, and they pull away late, win 34-24.
All right, boys. So you both have Texas winning the game. A little bit of a different way of going about it. I am heavy on Texas in this game. My final score is 34-10. There's a lot of pluckiness about Arizona State. I love the story. I love everything about it. I don't think they can hold a candle to what Texas is going to do. I don't think Texas is going to stumble out of the gate. I think they're going to come out and pound it. And Quinn Ewers is going to do whatever he needs to do, but he's not going to be the X factor in this game. I think they're going to run it down Arizona State's throat. And I don't know if Arizona State's going to know what hit them. That's kind of where I'm at with this whole thing.
So are you kind of seeing this, Vince, as like what we see in the NCAA basketball tournament from time to time? Cinderella goes on a run, but when it ends, it ends
hard. Like
yeah.
it ends off a cliff. Like that's where I see this one
they
going.
Finally run into that one really good team, and they run them off the court. Yeah.
And look, Texas has holes. Don't get me wrong.
Every team in the tournament this year has holes. 100%.
They are not a perfect team, but I think they match up well against Arizona State. That's where I'm at with this whole thing. I just think the matchups are not in Arizona State's favor. And as much as I like Kenny Dillingham and I like the story and all of that stuff, I just think Texas is going to be too much to handle for them. I just do. And I think it's going to be over pretty quickly.
The other thing too, Vince, is I think there's some misconceptions about Texas's run defense because of what Georgia did to them in the second half of the game last week. That wasn't typical of what Texas has done on the ground.
Yeah.
They've had a couple games here and there, but for the most part, they've been a pretty good rushing defense,
Right.
especially if the other team can't throw. And that's what killed Michigan. They could throw on them. Now, Sam Levitt's a way better quarterback than Davis Warren.
Sure.
Right? But not to the degree where I think they pull off this upset. So
Yeah.
I hope it's more competitive than that, Vince, but I won't be shocked. I don't. Trev,
Yeah, I want it to be more
shocked if Vince's
too.
score is what it turns out to be. I won't be shocked. I think Arizona
No.
State's going to put up a little bit more of a fight, Vince, but I wouldn't be surprised.
No,
Yeah,
I wouldn't at all.
Before we move on, would this be the biggest upset of the weekend? If all four teams that are favored to lose, like obviously Ohio State and I mean Oregon and Notre Dame wouldn't be giant upsets. They're 2-point underdogs. But of the two, would Arizona State beating Texas be a bigger upset than if Boise beat Penn State?
100%.
What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Not even close. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I would. I mean,
is that because of your thoughts on Boise, or more because you think Texas is that much better than Penn State, or both?
All of the above.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of the narrative base too. I mean, what would be taken away from the game? You know, you have a team in Arizona State that plays in the Big 12. Nobody thought anything of them and beat what was for a good amount of the season resume, like schedule wise, one of the better teams in the SEC. I mean, they were the highest ranked SEC team going into conference championship weekend, you know, and then you have a team like Penn State that has a lot of question marks around them. I also think Texas has a lot. They just aren't as highlighted, I think, partly due to what conference that they play in and the name that they have. And then what Penn State's reputation has been over the last couple of years is, I mean, they'll go 10-2. They'll lose to the two best teams that they play. So, I would say that this would be the biggest upset of the weekend. You can make the argument it would have been the biggest upset of the playoffs, if I'm being honest, up to this point.
Yep.
Because I don't like, you look at round one, I was high on SMU the same way that you guys were, and they would have beat a team in Penn State that, again, does not have a great track record in the big games. I don't think IU beating Notre Dame would have been this colossal upset, not in comparison to what this game would have been. Then, Tennessee, Ohio State, that game, I think the line was relatively close when it came out, you know. So, and you had one of the better SEC teams and one of the best Big Ten teams. So, yeah, I would make the argument it could potentially be the biggest upset of the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. What's interesting is I think we had this conversation last week, and the answer was Clemson beating Texas would be the biggest upset. And we're saying, which says a lot about the advantage of being the 5 seed in the college football playoff.
Man, you're saying,
right.
Yeah.